paddle wheels, 56 feet in diameter, weighing 90 tons each. A double hull that no shipyard had ever attempted. A propeller shaft running 160 feet through the keel, so heavy, the men who forged it had no precedent for what they were building. In 1854, Isambard Kingdom Brunel began constructing a ship so enormous that no dock on Earth could hold her, and no slipway could support her weight. The project would take 4 years to build, 3 months to launch, and would bankrupt every company that touched it. So how did the most advanced ship ever constructed end up carrying just 35 passengers on her maiden voyage? Brunel's double hull was the detail that drew the most criticism. 2 complete iron skins separated by a gap of nearly 3 feet, divided into 19 watertight compartments. Critics called it paranoid over-engineering. Investors called it a waste of money. That double hull would later become the mandatory construction standard for every ocean-going vessel on the planet. But in 1854, it was just another reason the budget was collapsing. The problem Brunel was trying to solve was coal. Steamships of the 1850s burned through fuel so fast that the further they sailed, the less room they had for passengers and cargo. Brunel's answer was a ship vast enough to carry 12,000 tons of coal and 4,000 passengers from London to Australia without stopping. One vast machine running on a single fuel load. The largest vessel afloat was the SS Persia at 390 feet. Brunel was proposing 692 feet, nearly twice the length of anything in existence, with 5 times the displacement. He partnered with John Scott Russell, who ran the Millwall Iron Works on the Isle of Dogs. Russell submitted a tender of £377,000. Brunel's own estimate had been £500,000, and he warned the investors that Russell had underbid catastrophically. Nobody listened. The actual cost would reach £750,000 before the ship touched water. No dry dock in the world was large enough, so she had to be built in the open air on wooden beams driven into the Thames shoreline. Russell purchased the shipyard next door just to have enough room, and 12,000 tons of timber formed the cradle beneath her. The hull was an immense riveting operation. 30,000 iron plates, each standardized at roughly 3 meters by 840 millimeters, had to be cut over individually, made wooden templates, rolled to the correct curvature, and fastened to the iron frame. Each plate took around 100 rivets. 3 million in total, everyone hammered by hand. Rivet gangs worked in teams of 4. A heater boy kept the forge going. A catcher grabbed each white-hot rivet with tongs. A holder-up pressed a backing bar against the head inside the hull, and a hammerman on the outside drove it home. The noise inside that double hull was devastating, and there were rumors, never confirmed, that at least one riveter collapsed from the heat between those 2 iron skins and was never found. 6 men died during construction. The pace was relentless, but the money was running out faster than the iron was going up. By early 1856, Scott Russell's company was bankrupt. Brunel had to take over management himself, paying workers out of his own pocket while fighting off creditors who wanted to sell the half-finished hull for scrap. The engines waiting to go inside her were unlike anything ever built. 4 oscillating cylinder steam engines powered the paddle wheels, each cylinder weighing 26 tons. Each paddle wheel measured 56 feet in diameter and weighed 90 tons. Together, the paddle engines produced 3,411 horsepower, double the output of any previous marine engine. But even that was not enough to drive a ship this size alone. A separate horizontal engine, built by James Watt and Company, drove the 24-foot screw propeller, adding another 4,886 horsepower. The propeller shaft ran 160 feet through the hull and weighed 60 tons. 10 boilers fed 112 furnaces, their exhaust rising through 5 funnels. She even carried 6 masts with over 5,000 square meters of sail, but the funnel exhaust set the canvas on fire whenever the engines were running, so the sails were essentially decorative. 8,000 horsepower and a ship that could not use her own rigging. By late 1857, the hull was finished. Now came the part that should have been straightforward, and instead became the most expensive engineering humiliation of the Victorian age. The ship was too long to launch bow first into the Thames. Brunel designed a sideways launch using 2 iron-railed slipways greased with tallow and angled gently toward the water. Steam winches would control the descent, using massive chains with links as thick as a man's arm, wound around 9-foot drums fitted with brake bands. On the 3rd of November, 1857, 10,000 spectators turned up. A director's daughter christened the ship Leviathan, a name that never stuck. Brunel gave the signal. The hull groaned, shuddered, and moved 3 inches at the stern. Then, one of the winch drums spun out of control. A chain snapped and whipped across the yard. One worker was crushed by the machinery. Another was killed. The ship did not move again that day. Over the next 3 months, Brunel threw everything he had at the problem. More chains, more winches, then hydraulic rams rated to withstand 12,000 pounds per square inch. The rams burst open under the load, 6-inch thick iron splitting apart. A 10-inch ram cracked. The slipway foundations, built too thin to support 12,000 tons against the subsiding riverbed, had allowed the bow ramp to settle lower than the stern. The ship was wedged at an angle on rails that were no longer level. The breakthrough came from Birmingham. The Tangye brothers supplied 21 more powerful hydraulic rams. On the 31st of January 1858, aided by an unusually high tide and strong winds, the Great Eastern finally slid into the Thames at 13 minutes to 2 in the afternoon. Richard Tangye would later say that they launched the Great Eastern and she launched them. His company was founded on the profits from that single contract. The launch alone had cost £120,000. The original budget had been £14,000. The Eastern Steam Navigation Company was finished. If you have watched this far, you now know more about Victorian shipbuilding machinery than most engineers alive today. Subscribe, because every video on this channel goes this deep. On the 5th of September, 1859, Brunel climbed aboard for a final inspection. He was 53 years old, and his kidneys were failing. He collapsed on deck with a stroke. 2 days later, the Great Eastern left the Thames without him. On the 9th of September, passing Hastings during sea trials, a stopcock on the forward funnel's water jacket had been closed by mistake. Pressure built until the funnel exploded. Superheated steam tore through the boiler room. 5 firemen were scalded to death. A 6th man, trying to escape, jumped through a coal chute and was dragged into the paddle wheel. The news reached Brunel at his home in Duke Street. He died on the 15th of September, 10 days after his stroke. The ship he had staked his entire reputation on had killed 6 men in construction, 2 in the launch, and 6 more on her first voyage. He never saw her carry a single passenger. The Great Eastern was too large for every harbour and too expensive for every route she was given. When the Suez Canal opened in 1869, she could not fit through it. On her maiden passenger voyage from Liverpool to New York in June 1860, she carried 35 paying passengers and 418 crew. The greatest machine ever built, and the world had nothing to give her. She found her purpose in 1866, not as a passenger ship, but as a cable layer. No other vessel on Earth could carry the 2,600 miles of transatlantic telegraph cable needed to connect Europe to America. The ship that was built to carry people ended up carrying wire, and she was brilliant at it. It took 200 men nearly 2 years to break her up in 1889. The real question is not whether Brunel failed, it is whether the world failed him. He built a machine for a future that had not yet arrived. The double hull that bankrupted his investors is now welded into the structure of every ship afloat. The watertight compartments he was mocked for would have saved the Titanic 50 years later. And the ship they said was too big became the reason two continents could talk to each other. You have just seen every machine that built, launched, and ultimately destroyed the Great Eastern. In our last video, we covered the RMS Queen Mary, the ship they could not afford to finish. Built during the Depression on the Clyde, she sat half complete for 2 years, while thousands of men waited for the money to come back. That story is on your screen now. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one, where we go inside HMS Dreadnought, the warship that made every other navy on Earth obsolete overnight.